Please, a lot of you are, I see a lot of you are not muted. Please mute. I don't want to call you out by name, but check and see your, kindly mute yourselves. Okay. Doing better. Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. As some of you maybe heard me say a little bit earlier, for some reason, this topic evoked quite a bit of interest, and we have a lot of people who are registered, and a large number of them are going to be listening to the recording. So the recording is really important. But I thank you so much for being with me, and I'm just going to begin. And I'm going to begin by telling you that when I was a kid, sometimes I'd wake up in the night and hear my father screaming. His bedroom was downstairs. The girl's bedroom was upstairs. I was upstairs, but I could certainly hear him. I was a little kid, but I did figure out that he was having nightmares, and I didn't exactly know what they were about, but they were nightmares about things that had happened to him and his family in Europe. That's what I found out much later, and I really found out that largely it was survivor's guilt for having escaped when many that he loved had perished. The Holocaust did play a large part in my family and personal story, but today I present myself in a pretty vulnerable, unrehearsed way because recent events finally make me want to tell some stories that I seldom share and really never have shared formally or publicly. There's not been any secrets, but it's just really not been on my agenda, so to speak. I did, for the first time, talk about much of what I'm going to talk about today at a testimony theater workshop that happened here in Cleveland about 2 months ago. It's where you meet with teenagers and they write your story into a drama piece and present it later in the year. It's an amazing program that is, as far as I can tell, pretty unique to this area. But when I told that story and I saw the mostly girls, there were a couple guys in that, they were like 14, 15-year-old kids. I realized that I needed to tell this story. And I'm telling it for me. That's why I needed to tell it. And you are the people that I'm going to tell it to, or that I want to tell it to. So I feel like it's really time to talk about two separate and I believe kind of unusual family stories that happened in my family between the years 1937 and 1947. The two stories are my grandma's, my grandmother Ida, I call her grandma. We never had bubbies in my family on any side. And my dad's story, my grandmother's and her son, my dad's, and how they actually continue to impact me. I want to ask if there's anybody here who's a descendant of a survivor on this Zoom right now. Okay. We lost 37 close relatives in the camps, about half of them adults and about half of them children. And I know that every Holocaust family has a story, and I in no way suggesting that mine is any more important than anyone else's. Since October 7th of 2023, and still till today, I've been different. I've noticed that I'm a lot more reactive to horror, to the negative reporting, to images than many of my friends and other family members are. I've been reliving traumas, waking up at night, my head going to very dark and bad places, a lot of them stories from the camps. Yeah, I've gotten some medical help, and I'm generally doing better. Also learned a lot about meditation. There's a term that's often thrown around called genetic memory or epigenetic memory. And I have an expert in my family, my son, and I just, maybe it's a real thing, but I asked him. So this is a text from yesterday to Ben. I didn't copy my question, but his answer was, it's kind of true. Genes that are associated with stress either turned up or turned down, can in very limited ways be nudged up or nudged down in offspring based on inherited epigenetic marks. Trust me, he's an expert. He also says, I do not think we are sure that those nudges specifically make you more sensitive to trauma. In fact, some studies suggest that they could make you less. And some suggest that the effect had nothing to do with feelings, but rather your metabolism. It's the last thing I wanted to hear. That I can blame some of my weight issues on my being a descendant of Holocaust survivors. But anyway, I'm going to say that there's reason to believe that there's some substance to the genetic memory kind of thing, and maybe that's what's happened to me. I'm mostly doing better now, but the images of those emaciated hostages that were released about 2 weeks ago, just under 2 weeks ago, 2 weekends ago, brought back a lot of my bad thoughts and even worse images. So that's enough of the precursor, so to say. I really have two stories to tell, and they span 10 years, and they begin together and they separate and then they come back, they reconnect. So the first one is my dad. His name was Cheryl Bisk, and he was an only child. His parents were married in what was called at that time in 1911 the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That involves today countries that we think of as the Czech Republic and Slovakia and Hungary and Austria and a few others, little. But at that time it was one country. And my grandmother had grown up just outside of Prague, and I can say the towns, Česká Budějovice. You try to say that, everybody? Okay. But she married somebody who was working in Vienna. So she married David Pisk. It was Pisk then, not Bisk, with a P. And they lived in Vienna. They got married in 1911. My father was born in 1913. His dad died in early 1926, right before his bar mitzvah. And he was an only child, obviously. Well, not obviously, but he was an only child, no siblings. And his mother's siblings, his uncles, put her in business, in a dry cleaning business, so that she could support herself after her husband passed away. He did talk to me about how tough it was, how he was teased, how being Jewish, even in the 1920s, was not a good thing to be in Vienna, Austria. And he certainly felt it in many ways. And there was a sports club where only Jews were members of, and that's where he learned to love soccer and became really an avid goalie and played a lot of soccer, even a little bit in the States here when he was young. He was young, he was proactive, and he saw the handwriting on the wall. And he had a secret weapon, and his secret weapon was his charm and his personality. I've really never met anybody who didn't like Carl Bisk. He engaged people in conversation largely because he was genuinely interested in them and not talking about himself. And so he had a large circle of friends, but mostly, he had very close relationships with his family, his first cousins, of which there were many, who were living in Česká Budějovice. So he went to Prague and Česká Budějovice. They're only like 50 minutes apart. And he got out of Vienna because he, as I say, felt that he thought his Czech citizenship might help him get a better chance to getting into the United States. Somehow he felt that things were coming, the shades of darkness were there.
The skinny Killer Day bread fits perfectly on my sandwich. Could I use?
Marilyn, could you please mute? Okay. I think we're still not muted. Let's see if I can mute. Maybe I can do it. I'm not sure I can. I can't because I'm not the host. Okay, at any rate, so I'm getting a little bit too what's the word I want? A little bit too technical and dwelling too much on that. So he decided that he was going to go and he'd be safer, and he moved to what was then Czechoslovakia. to this town, and he worked for his uncles. And he and a friend of his, whose name was Ernest, would go into Prague frequently and check if their applications for visas to the United States had been accepted. And what it was there was a posting on the window of the office one day every week, and they would go to town that particular day. And of course, their names were never on that list to get out. The war was coming and bad was coming, and he was hearing stories. And basically, his only hope was that the US consulate would be responsive to him. He got invited to a party, and there was a young woman there. He's about 23 years old. Okay. Got invited and he danced with her, and they talked all night, and they really just had a lovely time. I don't think there was anything untoward, but he did mention to her that he was trying to get to the States, and she did mention to him that, guess what? I work at the American consulate. So the next week, he went with his friend Ernest, because they went together every week to check, and on the window, the posting of the names were there, and his name was there. Regretfully, Ernest was not. It was bittersweet, it was difficult, but of course he's going to make use of that. Now, the Anschluss of Czechoslovakia, excuse me, of Austria took place in 1938, meaning or in early 1938, meaning the Nazis took control of Austria then. And at that point, all communication was cut off to the people between different countries. So he lost total contact with his mother, who was still working in the store in Vienna. And that was the end, at the beginning of 1938. He couldn't tell her his plan. He couldn't tell her he was leaving. She had no idea for many years what actually happened to him. But he did eventually get a ticket to the United States, but it was a few months after Nazis took over Czechoslovakia as well. So he was under Nazi rule. That is the definition, actually, of a Holocaust survivor, someone who has lived under the Nazis. That is the acid test requirement. So he went and tried to get a ticket, and they sent him certain places and certain procedures, and with not much friendliness. Ultimately, he found a Nazi officer who said, you will get a visa so that you can get a ticket. He had to bribe him, of course, and probably make small talk with him, which is what I said my dad's secret weapon was. Who knows what happened? But at any rate, the condition was you have to go on a German ship. So when he did come through, he was basically under German control his entire trip to the United States. And at any moment, he could have been arrested or anything under the Anschluss in terms of what Nazis did to Jews. He did make it. He got to he had a name of somebody and a name of an organization. And I hope many of you have heard of it, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Association. And he was told to report in Philadelphia, and he went there, and it's known as HIAS, HIAS. And the HIAS people said, we have a job for you, but it's 8 weeks from now. And in the meantime, he got some small stipend. I think, if I'm not sure I'm remembering correctly, but it was something like $6 a week, excuse me, not a month. That was bad enough, a week. At any rate, what he did with that time was sit in the park and talk to people and learn English. And he learned English. He learned excellent English. He made a point of it, and quite a bit in that 8 weeks. It was his third language, but even so, he knew how important it would be. And when he finally, it was time for him to report to his job, it was in York, Pennsylvania. And it was in a textile mill. And he reported there on the day that he was supposed to be. And as he was arriving there, he saw, according to him, 100 people in line, 100 men looking for a job. And he said, this is ridiculous. Why did they send me here? So many people want a job. And he went and he showed this piece of paper, and they put him at the head of the line. It had been arranged that he did get a job. It was an executive position, he called it. It was a needle threader in the sewing machines. And not only did he have to thread a lot of needles, he had to do it night shift. But during the day, he continued to practice his English and work on his English. And he basically had a reasonably good experience there, and the Jewish community was very welcoming to him. He did have culture shock in terms of what it was like going to a Reform synagogue near York, Pennsylvania, compared to what he was used to in Vienna. But that's just a part of the colorful story that he used to tell. At any rate, he couldn't, this was not his ultimate career goal to be a needle threader. He had higher hopes, and he worked his way up entrepreneurially to become a beach boy in Miami Beach, Florida. And what that meant is buying 6 beach chairs and 12 towels and a case of Cokes, apparently maybe some ice or a cooler, or whatever, and renting them to people who wanted them on the beach. And he did this for several months. And he taught, as I said, he was charming to speak to. So he met a lot of folks. And one of the people that he met was a guy, a rabbi whose name was, it happened to be a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Samuel Schwartz. I'm sure he was tipped off that there's a poor refugee boy down there hawking Cokes. Go give him some business. At any rate, Rabbi Schwartz said, move to Chicago, I'll get you a job. So that's how he ended up in Chicago. I'm skipping, of course, a lot, but just these things that we can fast forward, and I'll tell you that essentially he met my mom at a synagogue dance in Chicago. They were married in 1943 on August 22nd, and not knowing and assuming that his mom was gone, that she had not survived. What happened after that is that when the war was over, it became common to post lists of people who were in displaced persons camps. And they would check some newspaper. I don't remember which one. I don't know. I wasn't involved. And it took essentially 2.5 years, but they actually did find her name and they knew that she was alive. This is sometime in 1947, and she had survived. So they arranged that however it happened, that she ultimately came to the States. I was a baby. She was a German speaker. I was told my house was an English speaking house. She learned English overnight, apparently. It was an English speaking house. I supposedly, she talked to me as a baby in German. I learned, Connie, you'll appreciate, so gesund, so gesund, so geleben, so gewachsen, so gereisen. Do you know that, Connie? When you sneeze, that I remember my German. So gesund, you should be well. So geleben, you should live a long time. So gewachsen, you should grow. And so gereisen, what she told me it meant enough already. Shut up. I don't know if that's really what it meant, but that's what she told me. Anyway, that's about the extent of my German from her. But so moving right along, the contact was made, and she came, and she was a big part of my childhood. Every Shabbat, we picked her up, and my other grandmother, two places in the west side of Chicago, and we spent Shabbat at our house. There was with the grandma's bedroom. They were both widows, obviously. At any rate, well, I want to move forward a little bit, and tell you that my grandmother's story, because it's, of course, connected and relevant. So my grandmother's name was Ida, or we would say in English, Ida Bloom or Blum Bisk. Okay. Her whole story took place in what was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where she was born, and the countries, as I explained before, that continued on with names that we know today. At this time, when my dad was growing up, it was Czechoslovakia. Now we've got that as the Czech Republic and Slovakia. But her parents in the Czech Republic were Czechoslovakia at that time. No, Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time. She was born in the late 1800s. They were comfortable. It was a family of business people, primarily store owners, I understand. But as I said, she moved to Vienna when she married David Pisk. Oh, I have a visual. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I hope you can see this. So this is can you see it? This is my dad on the beach. Closer you want anything? Okay, Bertha. This is my father in in his job as a quote unquote beach boy, renting beach chairs and towels to people. Okay, so that's a picture on Miami Beach, one of the few things that I have of him at that time. Okay, so at any rate, I'm sorry, I got a little bit off track, but she was widowed at a young age, and she became the owner of a small dry cleaning place. Okay. Anschluss, 1938. control by Nazis taking over Austria, the annexation, what went into place were what are known as the Nuremberg laws. And it wasn't hard because Austria was overwhelmingly pro-Nazi from the beginning. But the Nuremberg laws affected her in many, many ways. But one of them that you might not be aware of is that it made it illegal for a Jew to own a business. So she had to give up her business. And what happened was, at the same time, it also made it illegal for Jews to employ Aryans in their businesses. So what we had was a situation where we have people out there looking for people to replace whoever they had to let go because they were Aryans, and we had people who had lost their employment because they were Jews. The chief rabbi of Vienna, whose name was Benjamin Mirmelstein, and there's a lot about him, a lot written. And he's cited in some Leon Uris books, and he had a family, and he had a 3-year-old child, and he had an Aryan, I guess you would call it, housekeeper type person who worked there, and he had to let her go. And however it happened, I don't know, but he hired my grandmother. So she became a part of the Mermelstein household. The reality was that he was selected specifically by the Nazis to become a leader in the Jewish community, to be their puppet, to say what they told him to say, always at the threat, obviously, of payment by people's dear lives. So she was there, and she was certainly protected because he was visible and he was protected. And she developed a good relationship with his 3-year-old son, whose name was Wolf. But she didn't know, always in the back of her head, what's happening with my son, what's happening, what's the story. I'm going to give you some details in a second, but let me just fast forward to say that the family was deported to Theresienstadt, where Rabbi Mermelstein, along with Rabbi Leo Beck, who is a name you should know, a very, very famous Reform rabbi, Baeck. At any rate, became the Judenrat in the concentration camp of Theresienstadt. Terezin, as is also known, has its own reputation for other things, and that's a story for another day. But it's also called Theresienstadt or Terezin. What does Judenrat? The Judenrat was the Jewish government, the Jewish council. So nominally to the outside world, it sounded good that Jews were controlling themselves in this wonderful place. In truth, these were people who were entrusted with giving quotas. They were charged every week with how many people they had to send to labor camps or to death. They had certain numbers. So obviously this is not a job that anyone wanted, and it was a horrific, horrific job. So the good part was that because she was in his household, she survived. She was over 50 years old. It's unheard of for someone to survive concentration camp, Theresienstadt or whichever, at that age. But she did survive because she was with this house. But it was not it was a very difficult thing that she didn't want to talk about, because she certainly dealt with and saw people pleading constantly to Rabbi Mermelstein. He didn't have much control. I'm going to give you a little bit more on that. We can only guess between the lines on what actually happened, but I found out something years later that I'm kind of excited to share with you. At any rate, so she was in this place where, for one thing, she knew that she would survive. Another thing is she did have food. They were high visibility people. It was a horrible place to be, but it was her story of how she survived. When the camps were liberated in 1945, she went back, like so many people, to her old apartment, which is, they called it an apartment. It's a condo. In other words, you owned your apartment. And I've been there, a big stone, very large thing with a circular staircase in the middle, with like 3 stories and an apartment or a house, or whatever you call it, condo on this side, 3 stories up. And she went to her, knocked on the door where she had lived. then that obviously had been taken. And they shoot her away and say, get out of here. We don't know what you vermin, get out of my face. And there was some yelling, and the person across the hall on the same floor saw her, and this woman had been her neighbor or their neighbors for years. And she motioned to my grandmother to come, and she said, I have this for you. And she gave her a shoebox. And the shoebox had been something that my grandmother had put together, I don't know how or when, of really important documents, things like my grandfather's death certificate, their wedding certificate, quite a few photos of people. And miracle of miracles, I didn't know about it until like the 1990s, but I'm the possessor now of this shoebox. And I'll just share with you a couple of the things that are in them. This is, the word means, I'm told, I'm not sure, but something like telegram or something. Connie?
It's a souvenir, Erinnerung, memories.
Memories, like memories? Okay,
Yes,
memory.
memories.
Okay, I got a German speaker here. Okay, thank you, Connie. 1911 was the year that my grandparents were married, and these are I don't know if you can see them, but these are the probably 100 telegrams that people sent telling them congratulations. Just, and they're really from all over. I'm sorry if it's not terribly clear. You're welcome to come over and take a look at it. And so I had the address of the wedding venue also and things like that. Mazel Tov, Rabbi Katz, whoever Rabbi Katz was. Okay. Anyway, so I have this incredible document, which is certainly showing age at this point, or this collection of things. One of the interesting things on it for me was that many of these, apparently it was a thing that you could make a donation to some charity while you were sending a telegram. So a lot of these were to something, the equivalent of something that we would today call like the Jewish National Fund, or the there was no Israel, the establishment to the people living in Palestine. So this particular Jewish Star thing was on a good representation of these particular telegrams. I had lots of pictures, but I'll send this one. I know, when my father showed it to me, I remember. So these were two of his very close cousins that he lost, first cousins. This is Eric and Dita were her name. They were in their teens when they were killed. They died in Auschwitz in 1943. And there are lots of those kinds of pictures. I'm not doing these in real good time sequence, but this is a picture of a wedding picture of my grandma Ida and her husband David. Can you see? Sort of. Okay, thank you. So I'm not gonna, that you got the feel. You got the feel of what that was. So at any rate, she was in a DP camp for a long time. And finally, as I mentioned before earlier, her name appeared on a list, and my parents did get her out, and she learned English and spoke it well. And she was very grateful to God. And one of the things that I learned from her was to kiss the mezuzah, or look at the mezuzah every time you walk out and you say, I'm leaving with God, and may I come back with God. This is one of the things I identify with my grandma Ida a lot. I don't know that I depicted all of that in very sensible order and in logical order, but I do have a little bit more that I just want to tell you. And maybe I'm not even watching the time. Okay, we're totally fine. Right, so excuse me for a second. Need to fast forward to the year 2009. Is living in El Paso, and I got a Skype call from someone living in England. Her name is Anna, and she said she's writing her dissertation about the women of Theresienstadt, and she thinks that I'm related to Ida Bisk. And I said, yes, she was my grandmother. So Anna knows much, much more about what happened in Theresienstadt and my grandmother than I knew. Ultimately, she ended up not only getting her doctorate, but she also wrote a book called Women of Terezin. And my grandmother is quoted with just her name is there. That's all in that particular book. But she knew a lot. And one of the things she said is, you know, you need to look at the records from the Italian. I'll tell you what the name of it is after these Holocaust records, because she's mentioned. So I hadn't even done any kinds of searches or things like that. But I Googled her again, my grandmother. Again, we're in 2009. And she came up right away. And what this was a, see what I can make sense of the source of it. Okay, this is a transcript from his son. Remember, I told you there was a 3-year-old boy. Well, the 3-year-old boy was then now at this point in his 70s. His name was Wolf, and he's a professor in Rome. Last I checked, he is still around. And the testimony that he gave for the Spielberg tapes. Are you familiar with those particular things? So I had we're thanking again Connie here today because she is a language institute, a living, breathing language institute. She, a dear friend of hers, helped me translate this from the Italian because he was speaking in Italian. This was recorded, but this is what it said. This is something that he recalled. Again, he was a child at that point. Wolf talks about how nervous his father always was, the tension, the stress. He was nervous because of the white star on the door that we had to paint. White star on the door, yellow star to be worn. That was the law of segregation in Vienna at that time. About our house, one big library with about 2,500 books, 3 bedrooms, plus one for the house governor, Mrs. Ida Bisk. At the time, from 1938, you could not hire help of Aryan race. So they had Mrs. Bisk, a very proud woman, someone who owned a small dry cleaning shop taken by the Nazis, a very independent woman. The law authorized an official of my father's level to have a house helper. She was more than a helper. We called her Tanta, aunt, Ida Bisk. She was supposed to immigrate to the United States, but for some quirk was unable to obtain the visa. I knew nothing about this. I don't even know what it's about. So she sought temporary protection from us. She remained with us from 1939 through the entire Terezin experience. She was originally from Bohemia, a place called Česká Budějovice. Okay, then he writes, this is at another place in this video, which is about 40 minutes long. Wednesday evening, I can't remember the date, but I know it was a Wednesday. It turns out later it's added January 28th, 1943. Mother receives a telephone call from Mrs. Bisk saying, tomorrow we have to leave for Terezin. You can imagine the commotion. The next day I remember 2 from the community coming to help us pack. My father arrived with 2 Judenpolice officers, whatever that is. Then another man came to disconnect the mail. We came down and got into a truck and headed to the station. Lots of other people were on the truck. In this house, later, in this house in Terezin Ghetto Barrack, I remembered that there was a Mr. somebody Kotsover, and in another room there was Mrs. Bisk. So this is kind of shocking that just randomly that stuff that this stranger calls you and say, I'm researching, I found this. Do you know anything? I couldn't add anything to her knowledge. She added a lot to my knowledge, but telling me of the existence of this particular thing. So I think I'm privileged in actually having that, and it's probably not all that common. But what I did after that, and it was in Italian, and Guido, a friend, did translate it. This is what I wrote to him because his name is Dr. Wolf Murmelstein. Again, his father was Dr. Benjamin Murmelstein, a Rabbi Benjamin Murmelstein. This is me, and this is in 2011. and I copied my brother on this. Dear Dr. Mermelstein, I recently found your 1998 transcripts from the Italian Ministry of Culture. Though my Italian is minimal, I do speak Spanish, so I was able to understand when you spoke of my grandmother, Ida Bisk. I'm the daughter of her only son, Carl. I would like very much to learn more of that time in her life, but do not want to inconvenience you or cause you any trouble. She did come to the US in 1948 and lived until 1972, clearly through the beneficence of your esteemed father of blessed memory. Would it be possible to hear a little bit more about what you knew of my grandmother? This can be in any way you feel most comfortable by phone. Yeah. I'm happy to arrange an interpreter if needed, Skype, post, or email. Thank you most sincerely. Wrote back almost immediately. Dear Madam, your message reached me just when I had to be ready for a film interview. It's precisely about terrorism. Of course, I have shown your message to the professor who was asking me the questions, I guess the interviewer on this film. I remember Mrs. Ida Bisk very well. I called her aunt. She stood with us from 1939 until her departure at the end of May 1945. My father highly appreciated that she answered questions of many poorly intentioned people in a very right way. I don't know what that means. It's haunting me, and I'm being vulnerable now that she had to turn away people who were begging. Not that she had any power or alternative to do anything else, but to be put in that position as a house dama, or any of the people who had to put in any way affect the fate of other people's lives has got to be terrifying, and hold something like that forever. Then he wrote, my late father had been able to manage things to the result of, okay. She talked about the very right way in which my late father managed things to result in the survival of many in Theresienstadt, a merit not generally appreciated. So he's implying that this rabbi did what he could. I know that someone told me something about that he would say that they would say, we need to have 2,000 people this Friday. And he would lie and say, so-and-so in such and such a field or department or God knows what said that they need an extra 300. So I can't send you 2,000. Is it okay if I only send, 1,700 or whatever? All of these kinds of nonsense games that it's painful to even think about. It's my imagination, but it's not so far from a probability, so to speak. So I just want to close with, and then we can talk or not. So as you can tell, there's a lot of Holocaust in my world. And those of you who've known me for a good period of time, or even for not such a long time, know that this is not a thing that I talk about very frequently, and I don't identify or share my personal stories, not in any way because I'm ashamed of them, but because I'll try to explain to you that I'm kind of made up for reasons in a different way, my makeup. I generally don't attend Holocaust memorial events or visit Holocaust museums. I certainly have. And don't misunderstand, because it's critically important that this be taught and that this be remembered and that people have the opportunity to reflect. But in my personal case, and I know that at least one of you on this Zoom have heard me say it, I don't feel that I benefit, I grow, I learn, or anyone else benefits if I go to another one of these programs. I don't feel that I gain anything. And a lot of that has to do with something that my dad said to me all those years ago. And what he said was, the way that we win over Hitler is to live a Jewish life and raise a Jewish family. So in my mind, at least, that's the better way to honor those that we have lost. So I've really taken my dad's advice to heart. And I think it's fair to say, to some degree, it's an obsession. Years ago, I pledged to do everything in my power to ensure a strong and viable next generation. First, as a hyper-involved lay leader, then as a Jewish professional and encore career and a Jewish communal educator, and of course, as a mom and a grandma, and now as a great-grandma. I don't want you to think that I'm at all indifferent or disrespect the Holocaust, and not at all. I have a full set of credentials of any second or third generation, which is what Holocaust survivor. My dad, my grandmother, 37 known family members who perished. I've also written a course on Holocaust for middle schoolers, and I've taught such a course 2 or 3 times. I've served as a docent in a Holocaust museum. My husband and I funded a Holocaust Torah educational display in an El Paso synagogue. And I've made certain that my kids and my grandkids know their family stories. I have a MP4 tape made in the late 70s of my dad telling his story, and that was very helpful to me. And now this testimony theater project, and however it materializes, will be told, our story will be told in front of an audience and in schools. I want to mention to you that sharing with you the business about the Holocaust Torah, we were at a event at Temple Mount Sinai, which is a wonderful Reform synagogue in El Paso, Texas. Some of you know it. And the rabbi announced that they were going to use a Torah that is not technically usable. It's not technically kosher. Kosher, the word means proper, folks. It has nothing to do with eating, really. It wasn't a kosher Torah, but they were displaying it for this event. And it had been rescued from a town called Česká Budějovice near Prague. And we're sitting there. We had lived in this community for 20 plus 30 almost years at that point. And oh my God, it's possibly the Torah my dad read from at his bar mitzvah, because his bar mitzvah was in that town. That's where his family was from. So that's how that happened. And the rest is history. There's a very nice display. If there's time, I'll show you a picture of it. But it's not just a display of the Sefer Torah. It's a story a little bit about the town. It's a story of a little bit of a homage to my dad, and some stuff about what it takes to write a Torah. So I always make people learn stuff. It's just this thing I've got. So anyway, what I have come to realize is that each one of us is a product of our experiences. And I have increasing, if it's possible, respect for other Shoah victims. It's super important to have that respect. But for me, that is never going to be the first thing that comes out of my mouth. It's going to be the part about our future, not about our past. So from my perspective, if the goal of Hitler was to end Jewry, then to really defy Hitler and really honor those that we've lost, we've got to keep Judaism alive, and to do it authentically, and to share the story, but more importantly, to share the joy and the wisdom and the vibrancy that we have in our heritage. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today. I wanted to formalize kind of, and I don't know that this was super articulate. It wasn't the best maybe presented, but it was from the heart, and I thank you for listening. I'm happy to have any, I don't think there's anything that you can necessarily refute, but if there's anything that anyone wants to add to, please feel free. I'm having trouble. I don't know why I'm having trouble. Maybe just the distance of the screen. Maybe I'll just move it closer. I don't know what the deal is. I know why. I'm not on full, I'm like real new to this Zoom. Okay, now you are. I wasn't on full screen. You were all tiny, tiny. So how's everybody? Karen, I see your hand.
Yeah, I want to thank you for sharing this story, this life, and how I know it has so much meaning to you, and it's inspiring. And I just thank you. I'm impressed.
That wasn't the goal, but I thank you for listening and for your kind words.
Cheryl, I knew your father and his personality, and he was amazing. Such a friendly guy, and just in the middle of everything that was going on, wherever we were talking, he was like the star, and it was lovely. I'd heard most of the stories and I was very happy to hear them again. Thank you for sharing them.
Anything else to talk about?
Do you?
Carlina?
Yes, I just wanted to say you have brought to the world for Jewish people what we need, and that is to speak out and to understand that anybody who wants to try and get rid of us, even to this day, with the anti-Semitism and everything, we need to stand up proudly as Jewish people, and you are a prime example of it. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. We're trying. I mean, obviously, what has been going on the last several years has triggered a lot, and it's maybe, I'm not trying to be in a contest, but for various family reasons, I think it's maybe touching my family, even more directly than it touches other people. So, I mean, a large part of this is the campus business, for us. So anyway,
Well, thank you. You're my cousin, and it's not my side that you spoke about today, but I know that since you came into my life through our ancestry connection, I have no, I've grown a lot. I have to say, these classes, I have books that I filled with notes and knowledge, and I refer back to them. And I think that's important, is to continue learning your whole life. But you've enriched my life with just the pearls of wisdom that I've gleaned.
Okay, I really, thank you. You're very sweet. I don't want, if that's the kind of, I really don't want any more of those comments. It's not because I'm an angel, it's just because, thank you, but I don't want those comments anymore.
I have a different comment then.
But you spoke for enough people, all of you
I have
guys.
a different comment, Cheryl.
Great.
Two things. Having just seen Leopoldstadt, and I can't remember if we talked about that. You see it, it just so reminds me of the emotion that I felt after that. But the question was, how do you think emotionally the whole experience affected your dad? He sounds like he was pretty together.
Thank you. I absolutely, there, like anybody, and these are things that are not my stories to share. There were trials in his life, not Holocaust related. He plowed on to keep, for the sake of unity and for the sake of family, because I think largely because of all of those who were lost. I also know that, I don't remember what year, maybe in the mid or late 90s, some Holocaust organization, possibly the museum in DC, was telling people that if you were a Holocaust survivor, tell us, and when you pass away, there will be this plaque that we want you to put on your the tombstones to mark and I think theoretically, in theory, it's a fine idea that, so you know that the person who passed away, the grave is marked as a Holocaust survivor. I mentioned it to him and he absolutely said, I'm not a survivor. But the guilt thing was a big part. He really was through a lot, which is, some that he never shared, some that I know that I didn't share. But everybody has a story. He had mostly a happy ending. And, if he were, and I think of this frequently, if he would see what his descendants are doing today, his wish has been fulfilled. So, so but on this thing about the personality thing, I don't know how many people, everyone's got this, but I don't know or imagine that there aren't too many people who have charmed a person at a dance to get you at the top of a list, and B, I have to tell you, Ernest did get out. Ernest did survive. He ended up living in California. It wasn't easy, but ultimately he got out. He was in camp, concentration camp. But my dad also charmed a Nazi officer into a charm / bribed with money. And that may have been common, I don't know, in terms of him getting a visa to get on this boat, because he got it from the American side, but he had to have the exit permission from the Nazis, and they did give him the condition, you have to do it, you have to pay in whatever German money they were using then, I don't know if it was Deutschmark, whatever was the thing, and you had to be on a German ship. But he did that, so he you know, has his little unique wins, so to speak, in this story that I think might be luck is a big part for anybody who has a story, that they were in the right place at the right time. We can all find those elements. But anyway, I just see him as a proactive player in this, not just luck happening. He made some of his luck happen. Marcy, did you want to say something?
I did. I'm taking a course on Rabbi Sacks and doing a lot of reading. And one of the things that we just discussed today in a class was in terms of victimhood. And he talks about so many survivors of the Holocaust who would not let themselves be viewed as victims. And they married and they had children. And for many of them, they didn't want to talk about their past until their future was set, until their kids were done. And then they might go and start speaking to the schools or whatever. But it was so important to look forward and not back. And I think your parents were very much of that ilk as well, Cheryl.
Helen, I got something you probably know about. Okay, I don't know. I was talking to a high school friend about 2 months ago. Jewel, by the way. Okay, this is, we have different parts of my life are here on the screen. Anyway, she said, have you heard about this book? So I haven't read it, I've skimmed through it, but it's a book that just came out in November. It's called Our Nazi. And the Nazi was Our Nazi at Oak Park River Forest High School in suburban Chicago, where Helen and I went to school. And he was originally, he was an SS officer who actually didn't really smartly hide any of his past, but got into the United States, and nobody was particularly concerned at really doing a deep dive into his credentials or his diplomas or anything like that. And he was hired initially as just a maintenance man at Oak Park High I think in the late 50s, mid 50s. And he worked his way up. And Oak Park High is a big place. It's 2 city blocks. It's a big physical plant. And he became the much beloved supervisor of maintenance for the whole thing, which was a big job. And he was a Nazi. And he was at the point at which it was become known that he had been a upper level Nazi person. Basically, no one wanted to do anything about it. They really liked him. It's forgive and forget kind of thing. And so at any rate, right in the basement of our 3 or 4 story high school, this guy was there when I was there, and I had no clue. But he ultimately was deported in the early 1980s. But and apparently this wasn't unusual. The folks that were living just under the radar with pasts that somehow were either lightly hidden or deeply hidden, but didn't get in the way of their, living with some success and happiness in the United States, even though they technically were war criminals under Nuremberg and shouldn't have been. So this just came into my world. Rhoda, you want to say something?
I think you should know a little bit about NCJW history with the Holocaust.
Yeah.
In the early 1980s, it became everybody was aware that the Holocaust survivors were dying. The population has gone way, way down. And NCJW formed a project called the Holocaust Archive Project. We had, Elaine remembers? We had interviewers trained to meet with survivors. They were photographed, and we had documentation of, I don't remember, but at least 25 survivors who told their stories. They were all different, and it was all very interesting. When we finished the project, we made a video out of it, and it appeared on WEWS in probably 1985. We wanted to send these testimonies, which were wonderful, to the museum in Yale. But Steven Spielberg wanted to do his own
Right.
interviews. So I can't tell you at this point what happened to ours, but we did a wonderful job. And this is something that CJW has been historically involved in.
Kudos, and thank you for letting me know. It's nothing I heard about. I appreciate learning about it. So anyway, well, I'm gonna let you guys go. I am scheduled. Do you want to say something, Helen, or are you just saying bye? You're just saying, yeah, okay. I'm scheduled to teach next month, and I'm sort of excited about it. It's 6 years ago. This is one of the last times we met in person. I did a little introduction to Musar, which is Jewish spiritual, ethical practice, self-improvement, so to speak. And I'm going to do a different version of it, similar again next month, about basically how we center ourselves to be the best people that we can be. And all of us, and I'm not trying to be trite or funny, we are good people, but all of us can be gooder. And this is just a way, in Judaism, it's a very expected and recommended thing to look at stuff over again. Once is not enough. So if you have ever been exposed to the practice of Musar, do it again. Please join me next month. It's really, the folks that I've shared it with lately have really enjoyed it and asked me to do it several times more. So I know that it's something that most people feel is worth watching. It will be on tape, and all of you who missed it, who are listening to me on tape, I thank you for taking the time to listen to it, and I wish you all well. And that's really all I've got right now. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. I'm just reading the chats. I thought it might be the Aufbau, but I wasn't, I couldn't source it, so I didn't say that. Sure.